Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore coming at you from Breckenridge, Colorado. Today on the show, we have Brenna Gebauer and Mark Haberstroh, who's been on the show before. I think Brenna and Mark met as part of navigating psychedelics for clinicians and therapists a year or two ago. They've developed a friendship, and we recorded this podcast at Lightning in a Bottle in California this year in 2022. I think this is a really interesting and deep, important conversation, highlighting a lot of nuance and complexity. I think humans kind of inherently want to simplify things, so it's a nice, neat, clean narrative all the time. And really, things are very complicated. And so we talk a lot about psychedelics and ethics and facilitation and things going on in the space. So, asking a lot of really fundamental and deep questions, I think, was a big deal here. And I just really grateful that Brenna and Mark took time out of their festival and recorded this with me. Amazing, really. And it's hard to do. Hard to podcast in general, then hard to take time out of a, party weekend or week really and do this. But it's important, and it was in line with the festival. Honestly, it's a really, really big deal festival. I think it's like the number one harm reduction festival in America. And Dance Safe was there. There was another group, Sanctuary there, kind of offering Zendo type services. And it's really, really good. Great time. And just grateful that, students that have come through our programs have done so well. Really incredible to me. So Brenna, thank you. And Mark, really thank you. This is a recording mainly with Brenna, but Mark jumps in a bunch too. I think that was the plan. I really wanted to do a whole podcast with Mark too, but didn't get around to it soon enough. I think Mark's visiting me soon here. So we'll get into that once he's here or sooner. All right. Well, I think that's it for this intro. Brenna Gebauer, thank you very much for joining us. And yeah, we'll see you on the other side of this episode. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. I'm with Brenna Gebauer. Damn, I did it right.
You nailed it.
Nice. We are in an RV at Lightning in a Bottle. Yes.
My parents' RV.
Nice. This thing's dope. Yeah. And we're going to go all over the map. But, let's maybe start with who you are. Like, how did you come to this psychedelic space?
Yeah. I guess for me, it started more so as a child being connected to Earth. And I came from women in my family that would use plants as healing agents.
Where are you from?
I'm from Shasta County up in Northern California.
That explains it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was like you would get poison oak and you'd put oatmeal on your face. And
nice.
So it started there. And then as I started developing into my own sense of being, I realized that was part of who I was. And to be honest, psychedelics found me. I wasn't looking for them. But the connection to Earth it just felt very harmonious.
Love it. Like, did you see psychedelic use at that point or recognize it ever?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of us, there was the early 20s at shows more recreationally. And then as I got older, it was more an intentional choice to explore myself. And there was multiple things that started converging. And at that point, mushrooms was the one that really kind of tandemed with meditation and became very transformative in my life path.
Love it. Yeah. And it's kind of a typical, somewhat common path, right? As you start recreationally and then all of a sudden maybe something happens and then it turns kind of serious. And, I think I inverted that.
Mm-hmm.
I got really serious for a lot of years and I'm like, I think I need a little levity after how dark that shit got for decades.
Totally.
Yeah, that's kind of how I landed here in an interesting way. So what was next?
Well, before we go there, it's really interesting that you would say that, because one of the things I feel like we don't hear enough conversations around psychedelics right now is play. It can get so...
A pleasure is super bad. You didn't hear? I think they're trying to make it illegal.
I've stopped listening to those voices. Yeah. So where did it go from there?
Or one thing, like one of my friends, Jazz Kadosh, an anthropologist from Montreal, living in Denver now, or Boulder, she said that there's a fair amount of evidence of, non-Western use for pleasure. And there is a long anthropological history of it. So what do we do with that? But anyway.
Yeah, I think we play with it. Life
Explore.
is play. Explore it all. Yeah. Okay, so trajectory, I guess, was really my own personal development as far as my relationship with different psychedelics and having numerous transformative experiences that made me realize that a lot of the things that were causing dis-ease in my life were a byproduct of how I was living, and primarily that being the industry that I had been in for 17 years and kind of came to...
What was it?
I was an international wine consultant.
Pretty sick.
Yeah, it looked...
But I can see how that can be hard, too.
Yeah, I mean, it looked really good on paper. And I was checking all the societal boxes to happiness and finding out my soul was empty. So that was the reason I started exploring myself, and then plant medicine kind of really gave me a
name
springboard.
for that. Like, do either of you know the name for this? It's like like Stan Groff had it in a few of his books, where it's like, once I get there, I'm going to be super happy. Once I buy that house in Beverly Hills with like 4 Lamborghinis, then I'm all set, and I never have to stress again. It's like, nope. You get there, and there's a lot of feelings of emptiness and other things that you're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
This is not what I thought.
I got sold a lie.
Right.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I was one of the people that decided to just kind of like quit life. And I had numerous experiences with psychedelics that had given me this awareness of the changes that needed to be made. But I didn't quite know how to make the transition because it was such a big thing. I was like, am I really going to quit everything I've built? And the people around me were thinking it was a crazy proposition because of everything that, society tells us. And so I decided to turn down the noise, and I did my first Vipassana. For those that don't know, it's 10 days of meditative silence. And it was really pivotal for me because at that point I realized even more inherently that everything that psychedelics show you is already inside of you, because I was having those same experiences, but it was all just me.
Typically same, but a little slower, right?
Yeah.
And perhaps a little more permanent?
I would say more resonant. There was no question that this was my being. Whereas...
That's a good point. Sometimes you can get confused by the perspective of external entities, and that can be really confusing for people.
Yeah, very much. And that's one of the things I share with people, in this work, is it's really important to know that this is you, because if you are thinking that it's something that you're bringing in, then it's not going to be able to be as long-standing, or you're going to, same thing you were saying, going to keep needing to go back for more.
I'm thinking of the people who've done like 200 to 500 ayahuasca sessions. It's like, is it working? Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes.
It's one of my favorite lines. It's all in your head. You just have no idea how big your head is.
That's a big one. It's kind of reminding me of an Alan Watts quote around psychedelics, though. It's like, when God answers the phone, you stop calling.
Yeah, when you get the message,
like
pick up. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah. Yeah, there it is. Yeah. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah. So it's Vipassana, I think. Like, there's something about Buddhism and Buddhist practice that's like really integrally linked right now with psychedelics. And I appreciate that. It's kind of like a two-way flow often. Like a lot of this kind of newer kind of neurosci informed Buddhism even is getting a lot of people to come over, even though it's like a weird atheistic set sometimes, but sometimes they'll get surprised by the spirit, I think.
Yeah.
Who knows? You have any perspective on that?
What's coming up for me right now is it's really interesting how much research is important and finding solid evidence to things that many of these traditions have known as a truth for so long. I understand why people are in both camps, and I think it's necessary. I personally kind of fall into this is my personal experience. This is what I know to be true for myself. You can study it, but that's not going to change what I know.
I think that, as much as I would hate for the or love for the conflict to chill, I think the conflict is actually super helpful for developing like the new models that we need and like iterating models. If we didn't have the tension, there would be no urgency to kind of keep evolving it, right?
Yeah.
It's like tension is helpful.
Yeah, it's kind of like the contraction and expansion.
Yeah.
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 They need each other to exist.
Yeah. It's this kind of like thesis, antithesis, synthesis thing. Hegelian dialectic, I think they call it. And it's like a really helpful thing to understand. It's, not always accurate, but it's like a helpful tool to like help us understand these things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also important to have flexibility in your own perspectives. If you get too fixed and only say my way is the only way that it is, then I think that's counterintuitive to this work in general.
A thing that used to be really popular, it's not really popular anymore, Robert Anton Wilson's ideas around reality tunnels and how like this is just a perspective informed by certain theories and preconceived notions. But what if you were able to flip between like 20 reality tunnels to understand a picture a little bit better? So you understand like the Austrian economics model plus the Marxist model plus like, Ben Bernanke's vision or whatever it is. And then you can like analyze the situation and go, oh, cool. Like I think I get a lot more now than just like a simple Marxist interpretation. It's like a little too basic.
Yeah.
To like be really fleshed out. And we're simple mammals, partly civilized primates with sharp teeth.
Yeah,
like
for sure.
Barely not pulling each other apart.
It's so interesting because when I heard you talking about that, what just kept coming up is it's like empathy, right? Just understanding a different perspective to be able to be flexible that everyone sees it from a different way based on their own experiences.
Yeah. Shower thoughts last night.
Because you have a shower in your fancy tent over there.
I'll admit to only showering for about 15 seconds because it was too cold. I was like, no, I cannot do this right now. Yeah, like the 25 milligram edible of THC. And I'm like, I am way too high. I'm having really interesting thoughts. But I'm like, thinking about how I approach a lot of topics. And, I feel like I have a lot of rigor in the way I approach things. And I try to make arguments that I can't poke holes in, but other people can, and they're welcome. But, it's helpful. But I'm like, there's other people who have really similar and interesting perspectives that I don't feel compatible with to even understand their perspective yet. Yeah. So I'm like, they've got a lot of really great lived experience, but how do we get in there and like have enough compassion and empathy to really like take the time to understand it? That's a really hard thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think our societal structure really invites that at the speed that things are asked to operate in. Just slowing down on our own as a being, turning down the noise like I was talking about. And to be able to do that for someone else when yours is so full, it's like a whole nother juggling act.
Like how can we open opportunities for dialogue as opposed to, I'm going to be such an asshole on Twitter that nobody ever wants to talk to me or talk about this problem ever again.
Yeah.
Because it's scary and threatening and I might get bullied online if I even ask these questions, probably also in person.
Right.
But like, that's not the kind of culture we need, right? It's like a lot of openness.
Totally. I mean, it's a big conversation. And I think the polarization around so many of these topics and then you go into like the viewpoints of anybody just being publicly available and other people finding them as truth instead of for themselves. But I recently had a journey for myself, and my big takeaway was slow down. And it's been a really hard integration because especially in the psychedelic space, it feels like everybody is saying speed up. And it's an interesting thing to try and balance because if you don't move at that pace, the people who want it to be paced at that speed will. And
it might work, it might not.
Yeah.
So like I had some interesting discussions with some people on my team recently about this, like urgency. What is urgent? What isn't? And, I get that we should carefully implement good laws but what are those? And like, what about the people who have been in jail for, a year, 2 years, 20 life? because of drug offenses. Like, where's the urgency there? We should just release them immediately. Like that is a no fucking brainer. And in a lot of these discussions around psychedelic decriminalization, that's not even really like, and what do we do about fentanyl ODs? Like people using psychedelics or MDMA, and all of a sudden there's fentanyl in there and they have a situation and either die or need to get hospitalized. And that's, is that not urgent?
Yeah.
So for me, it's like safe supply and liberation, like getting people, ending the drug war immediately and safe supply. Those are my most urgent issues. And it's like all these little squabbles around how best to decriminalize or legalize is like, that's kind of baby steps towards what we need, which is we need those 100,000 plus people that die every year from fent ODs to like stop.
Right.
And we need to get our families back together in some sort of, I don't even know, like if we let everybody out, like how do we get them happy and healthy again?
Yeah.
And integrated to culture.
Back into society.
Like some of these people get out of jail and they can't even go see their families or friends. Like they're legally not allowed to see these people. It's crazy.
Yeah. What you're talking about is super important. And I know we were chatting before. I think something that I remind myself to do is try and stay in my lane and hope that the people in their lanes within
What's
this
your lane?
space.
Like how do you define that?
Well, I guess first and foremost would be working as an underground facilitator. And after that, the veteran community was one of the biggest that I started advocating for early on. And that has been a trajectory that I've stayed with for quite a bit. I work as an ambassador for Heroic Hearts, and I'm currently implementing their waitlist program because as it exists, they go and have these journeys, but there's not as much preparation. And there's somewhere in the ballpark of 500 people that are on the wait list. And there's so many tools that they can start using on a day-to-day basis that are going to set the stages for these major journeys to be more transformative. And I think those tiny habits in general are where a lot of these big changes happen, is tiny habits that are done consistently. And what I've experienced is preparation is so important for these journeys. And that's not a conversation that's talked about. So to be able to support that population in that way is huge. And the next step is putting on a conference specifically geared for veterans in psychedelics through an organization out of San Francisco. So that's a huge passion of mine, is working there to support those that have supported us as a country. And the other vein is really figuring out how to hold ethical spaces in underground communities that are unregulated. And it's kind of like posing some of the big questions that you were, is who's doing this? How do we do it? Who has the decision-making power? And they're all big questions and a lot of conversations to be in. And I try and put myself in as many rooms as possible with people who I respect to come together and have the conversations like you were talking about. Like, maybe our opinions aren't the same, but what can we learn from each other that can be supportive of the collective and be flexible in what that looks like?
I'm gonna be harsh for a sec.
Ooh.
Some assholes in the space say some things like, if we treat veterans, aren't we just making war cheaper? Which, to a degree, yeah, there's some truth. But also, like, is it that simple? Like, don't these people deserve a life? Often they made this decision before their prefrontal cortex was fully developed, sometimes 15, 16, 17, 18.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of money going in to get them into the pipeline. And, I have so many veteran friends that I feel so fucking bad for. And yeah, I just recorded with Kimberly, who runs the ketamine task force, working hard at the federal level. You got to meet her probably in Salt Lake.
Maybe, yeah.
She was the table right next to me. She's working to get ketamine like just really covered. She has chronic or CRPS, chronic regional pain syndrome, and fibromyalgia, and like ketamine is the only thing that's like kept her afloat.
Yeah.
And she's like really joining up with some powerful folks to do that, which is amazing. And, there's people doing really great shit. And I don't know, like backing up because I want to rant there. Just like first response to that kind of shitty comment I made about just making war cheaper. Because this was leveled at MAPS regularly when they started to take money from the Mercers and like talk to the VA and shit like that. And go ahead.
I think there's a a couple of different threads that could be pulled here. At the end of the day, I'm looking at the individual, right? And my dad was in the military, and because of his service, this prior to even being in the psychedelic space, I've had a deep respect for those that served. Maybe not the organization as a whole or the idea of war, but the individuals who put their lives at risk to do so. So that, I guess, would be my personal perspective on it. Bigger picture, I think that it's a community that if I truly believe that psychedelics are transformational, that population, hearing the voices of those that have found that that's the only thing that would be able to get themselves in a position of wanting to live every day, can really change the perspectives of larger demographic than, say, me as a facilitator living in San Diego. That
you're trying to empower community.
Yeah.
Like, that's what it's all about. We got to light a lot of fires, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just about the individual, right? It's about their whole family system and the dynamics of how that plays out across like multiple network links of, relationship and intergenerational trauma transmission. Like, there's so much going on here.
Yeah.
So just doing like a simplistic brush off is such a dick move, and we should not be doing that.
Right. I agree.
The people who said this know I'm talking about you. So be careful and go easy. I just had some like really offensive shit go down in my personal world around veteran stuff. And I'm like, just this last week. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
This guy I knew my whole life, looked up to him, said that? Are you kidding me about my friend?
Yeah.
What? So like, it's really just like personal for me often.
I can feel that.
I try to take everything personally.
Well, what you're saying though is really important. I'm a firm believer that we heal together. Even if we do it on an individual level, it has a ripple effect on everybody you come in contact with. And one of the things that we are holding very true for the conference that we're putting on is it's veterans and their primary support system to be coming and sponsored. So it's not just
so important.
The individual, but the people that have, been by their side. Because
how many relationships collapse after psychedelic healing when only one party's engaged in their deep personal process and the other party is still going like, who are you now?
Yeah.
What just happened to you?
Yeah. In fact, I've heard this conversation in some underground threads just talking about how everyone's holding the space. And I know for myself personally, if they're in a relationship and their partner is not supportive, I don't feel comfortable going forward with it because I don't think it's doing a service to the work. And there's already something existing that needs to be dealt with prior to going into these big medicine journeys.
Just want to acknowledge your presence real quick.
Hey there, my name is Mark Haberstroh. I am a guide that's working in various countries around the world. I have experience working in various countries around the world and teaching and holding space for people in the Bay Area, and also leading community gatherings. I support a friend of mine who has an organization called Myco Rising Fungi. His name is Seth Warner, and he's doing big things to build community, taking people on microdose hikes in Oakland where it's decriminalized, as well as teaching cultivation courses.
And you've taught on our program before. You've been on the podcast before. We met you ages ago in Jamaica at a retreat that should not be named. And been a great friendship ever since. So stoked you're here. Stoked you can be part of this. We're going to do a podcast with you later. This one's to really focus on Brenna. And when the spirit moves you, grab the microphone.
I appreciate it.
Anything on the veteran topic you want to comment on?
I feel like that's kind of out of my wheelhouse. I agree with everything that's been said so far. I wanted to loop back to the preparation topic, and just there's a lot of emphasis on the journey and on integration these days, and conversations I've had with Brenna and other people in the community. Keeping things open source has really helped me to learn and realize that preparation is huge and there's a kind of a void there. And so another thing that Seth and I are working on and are going to begin at the end of next month is holding preparation circles, which I haven't heard of yet, and getting people together to share how they prepare and to teach what's worked for me.
Anything you want to add on preparation?
Well, I love hearing that that's a direction you're moving, Mark, and thanks for being here. Yeah, I think preparation is one of the most undiscussed parts. To me, the preparation, the journey, and the integration are all almost of equal importance. In fact, I have seen people have huge transformations in the preparation process that was exceeding their expectations of what they were going to get out of the entire thing. And then the medicine just became a springboard to it. This has not been proven in research, but I believe that when you are intentionally moving in the direction of doing this work, that it's almost like part of your being starts to know it's getting an invitation to be seen. And those things come to the surface and you can really start addressing them and almost having agency in the entire process. So I feel it also offers an opportunity, if you are working with a facilitator, to make it more co-creative and mitigate power dynamics, because you are setting the stage for your own journey. And I think that that's really important.
When I did a few sessions, I think 3 total one-on-one sessions in Jamaica, I had 6 to 7 hours of preparation calls per client. And I still felt like that was inadequate. But it's because, your preparation feels like 0. Mm-hmm. And, the mushroom experience feels like infinity. So it's like, how do you set that stage? And it's an interesting concept. Mm-hmm. In holotropic breathwork, we say things like, such a political term now. I don't even know if I can say it out loud. Holotropic breathwork. I'll do it again. Holotropic breathwork. But and I'm sorry, that's so inside baseball, everybody. We'll figure out how to get that story out eventually. But the process starts as soon as the person makes the decision to do it, and then starts the conversation. Yep. And we like to call it process. Like, your process gets really big, your process gets amplified. Like, did you finish that process? And it's like a lot of process language is what we use in my world with Kyle. And like prep has always been a part of it for us. But like the larger culture, like this is so novel that we're like, yes, there's groups in America that have been active for many decades. My lineage comes from Soviet Prague. They've been going since the 50s. Yeah. And, comes out of Freud and Jung, right? So it's like so different. And I feel like an alien often in the psychedelic scene as a result of that. Yeah. But it's all there, tens of thousands of hospital sessions, between there and Maryland, with all sorts of substance. Yeah. LSD primarily, but plenty of other stuff. So, I'm glad the conversation's coming out, and we've got to figure out how to kind of normalize that and make that kind of like standard part of the process for everybody.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think this is another reason why it's so important to try to share information amongst communities, because all the different retreat centers I've worked at, the different trainings I've done, everybody holds the preparation space a little bit differently. And it's been wonderful for me to take nuggets from each one, different languaging that seems to land better and more easily with clients, and go from there.
Brilliant. Brenna, let's do PrepCon.
Okay, let's do it. Oh my gosh, I would be so excited about that.
I'm into it.
I feel like we're onto something. Where's it going to start? I think.
We could probably do it in January in San Diego.
Okay, you know what?
I might need
San
to do March.
Diego's beautiful in January, and every month of the year.
I'm just thinking about my freaking travel schedule. I'm like freaking out.
I'm all in.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. So I want to hear about like some perspectives on Oregon. You've been a little bit involved. Oregon's highly interesting, highly novel, highly political, really divisive topic, actually.
Yeah.
But what first comes to mind when you start thinking about the mushroom situation in Oregon?
That it's happening too fast.
Too fast.
Yeah. I don't believe that you can train people in the amount of time that they're going to need to for this to launch. So that's part of the whole like slowing down thing that was discussed earlier. Is I feel like we should slow down, but
what can be done?
I don't have answers for that. I would be speaking out of line if I said I knew.
It's fair. Yeah, a lot of people have that. I do my perspective on training is that it should be at least a 2-year process. At least there should be a lot of personal involvement. But, like that's my perspective.
Right.
People have been doing this for many thousands of years with no formal training whatsoever, but they have, kind of that apprentice kind of training. It's just been normalized. It's what they're around their whole lives.
Yeah. Like the mentorship model, apprenticeship. And this is my perspective, is that one of the first things that I often ask people when they are moving in the direction of wanting to hold space for others is like, what's your relationship like with the medicine? I think that's really important. And right now I'm seeing a lot of people come at it from a different angle. This is like not right or wrong, but just for me, I see a lot of these programs and I want to know that my facilitator had done a lot of their own work with these particular substances.
Right. This is one of the things that I think we're going to see play out in Oregon is that correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but I think they're going to allow people to be trained to be facilitators and licensed before it's legal to do it. So the first round of facilitators may not be capable of having sessions themselves. And so that might be one opportunity to slow down. But like, this is so out of my control where if we waited until after it was legalized in the first round of trainings, people were able to have legal, safe experiences before they were certified. I think it'd be really helpful, but it's also not even necessary in the training curriculum for people to have experiences.
That is true. So, yeah, people will get certified before January 23. And that's interesting, 23. I didn't pull that together. There's a lot there for me personally. But okay, so they don't need a mushroom session. Like the language around the experiential and practicum part are really complicated. And you can watch videotape, you could do holotropic breath work, you could do ketamine, you could travel to Jamaica and probably use mushrooms. Like there's a lot of options, or just watch videotape of a session, which we're actually kind of interested in building out a video library of sessions. So there's a lot there. And yeah, like this has always been, like if you look at cannabis, this is also a problem. It's like, how did you get those genetics to set up your companies? Like there's this kind of like black market origin story that has to occur. So yeah, like anytime we regulate, we cause a little bit of problem. But is it necessary to regulate? Maybe sometimes. Jim Fadiman, we talked to him a year ago maybe. And he's like really excited about this whole psychedelic situation, but he's like, the first bunch of years are going to be a mess. As if the 60s weren't a mess.
Right.
But any thoughts?
I haven't really
it gets sorted out in time.
Talked to very many people that have come forward and said anything other than we know that it's going to come with growing pains. And the best thing we can do is have good intentions and do the best we can with what we have, because we're working within a model currently. So I appreciate those that are willing to see forward and say, we know that problems are going to arise and we know why we're here and what we're doing this for. So, I mean, that's life, right?
Here's another perspective. Like, we need to make progress on this. We know that. There have been mistakes going on for probably thousands of years with this stuff. Like, it's not like all indigenous use cases, First Nations people's use cases are perfect or ideal, right? And different psyches take things differently. Different people, different cultures, different ages. Like, who knows? Like, there's so many factors going at play here. And who's to say what's right universally?
Right.
And like, how do we decentralize, regionalize, like both practice and ethics? And isn't it okay if we have some failures and we just have to iterate? Like yes, there's going to be some pretty gnarly damage here and there, but I think it's going to be really fucking rare that it's like tragic, really rare that it's tragic. But, obviously people getting touched or in weird situations, like that's obvious. But have you heard of fusion therapy?
No, I'm unfamiliar.
It's a big part of the psychedelic history, and there was a lot of debate in the 60s between psycholytic and psychedelic therapies and fusion therapy being used. Fusion therapy, a lot of physical contact.
Yeah.
And like, I think often like skin on skin when somebody's regressed in a regressed state, to give them that experience that maybe they didn't get from their birth mother. And when you're separated, I have this problem. I was separated from my birth mother for months after being born, and there was a lot of anxiety as a result. And a way to, in some people's minds, the fusion therapy people's minds, it's a lot of skin on skin contact and like close contact can help impress that. But you can't do it alone. You have to do it in groups. Like there's a lot of obviously like safety things you can do. Any immediate reactions to that or response?
Well, I think it really taps into one of the things that I feel is really important in this work in general, which is creating a safe container, talking about boundaries prior to medicine, making sure that everybody is fully on board, knowing what is okay. And I think power dynamics also comes up as to who knows what's best for somebody else's healing process.
They know best. The individual knows best.
Exactly.
Not the expert.
Right. And
They're the world's foremost expert in themselves.
On themselves. Absolutely. I'm 100% in agreement with that. And so I think that those conversations are really important to have, building up preparation.
On the record,
preparation.
Brenna, on the record, is touch in sessions okay, or should it be permanently banned from psychedelic work?
On the record, I feel like certain previously agreed upon touch can be very therapeutic, but there should be hard and soft, like hard boundaries for the most part that are agreed upon before. So I have plenty of people that say, no, I don't want any touch. And that is 100% respected unless there's a situation of which they could be in danger. And that has never happened. So, but the idea of hand-holding, if they are okay with it and they have agreed upon it before, I think that is something that it's just like boundaries that you and I would have, even though society doesn't really put us in a position where we ask people if it's okay to hug beforehand. Although I think it would probably be a good thing to implement.
Post-COVID, it makes a lot of sense. If this is post-COVID.
Yeah.
I found like some friends recently over the winter. They're from the Bay, so obviously an advanced culture. Well, kind of. Like, can I hug first? Or are you up for a hug? I'm like, oh, that was actually really conscientious of you. Yeah. I really like that. So consent, always. If you can, it's a big deal. But yeah, like there's some folks out there who are trying to say categorically touch should never be a part of psychedelic sessions. And that to me is super ignorant. It's like you're not aware of the history, you're not aware of the science, and you're just out there shooting shots to piss people off and get a reaction maybe. Or
I wonder what their trauma history is as well. I mean, what's their story to get them to a position where they feel like that is unanimously the only way things are? I mean, those are questions to ask too. Safety is so important. I mean, absolutely super important. And at the same time, like I have experienced myself and seen that like each situation is different. There cannot be this is the only way that this is going to show up, because anybody that has worked with these medicines extensively, I don't want to say anybody, for myself, like I come into this and I never know what's going to show up in a journey. I have an idea of what it's going to be like, but if I thought I did, I wouldn't be prepared for whatever it is. So just know that this is an individual thing, but taking touch off the table completely, I don't feel like it is doing a service for what this work is about.
I totally agree. And I feel like it's so different from person to person. The relationship to touch is so different. And culturally, I think we're rather repressed around it. And so one of the things I learned recently from one of my mentors is, you can break it down in the prep sessions, talking about it a long time before the journey as like, hey, if you're not comfortable with touch, cool, we'll stay there. And if you feel like you might want to hold my hand or have a hug, or in the relational somatic healing space, there's certain holds that I think could be really valuable in the journey space. And then, so the second route would be that if you're wanting some touch, then you have to ask for it. And I'm available for this, this, and this. And then the third category would be for people who are totally trusting, very safe with their practitioner. And they might even ask, like, I'm totally open for it. If you feel like I might need a hand on my shoulder or one of these holds, just go for it. And breaking it down that way gives them a lot of power.
In the Groff world, there's a lot of prep. It's like, yeah, totally. Like, if you don't want it, just say no. But if you want to...
Yeah, and just real quick, I think it's really important to hold that a yes can become a no, and a no cannot become a yes, certainly in the journey space.
One more time.
So once the session has begun, if somebody says no, then it's like, okay, we won't touch, and we're done here with that aspect of the journey. If they decide later in the journey, like, actually, I do want that touch, it's like, no, you said no, we'll talk about it later, and we can unpack what occurred before, just for full consent. And so... because things can change and shift in that space, and I don't think
even hand holding.
I think
this is where hard rules. It's hard to make rules.
That's
right?
true. I guess it's case to case.
Right. As long as the patent police don't get in the way of our hand holding. Woo.
Yeah, I think that is a good rule of thumb, and that's where I think hard boundaries are really important. And the other thing that I think can be very supportive in preparation is to also liberate people to practice saying no and yes with their facilitator, and recalibrating if something doesn't feel like it resonates. And if you can establish that trust prior to the medicine work, I think it empowers the individual. And I think that for me is one of the ultimate goals, is to empower them to find within themselves their truths and whatever their path to moving towards healing looks like for them.
Yeah. I don't like to do body work until I actually know a person, like a few sessions into them at least. It's helpful if it's been like 6 because I understand their process a little more. And it's, again, a little. Like, you're only getting a glimpse of their process and you don't know the whole story ever. Like, it could look like you get it, but you're probably not going to get it.
I think it's even kind of reckless to assume that you know.
Yeah. Like, there's plenty of documented case studies around this, and it's worth discussing.
Yeah. Totally.
And, here's another thing. Like, I get this from my my ski and like outdoor experience. So in my world, the ideal is to be really open and transparent when you trigger an avalanche, and like talk about it so everybody can discuss it and learn like in real time. And it actually saves lives when you do that. And a lot of people get shamed or even like legally intimidated not to share. And as a result, there's more risk and harm to people. And so how do we eliminate this culture of shame and fear of openly discussing these things?
Yeah, I love that analogy.
It's big, right?
Yeah. One of the things that I have discussed with different people all over the world is one of the only things that seems like it may work within our culture that has so much shame and everything to unpack there is having anonymous places for people to talk about things that come up in the container of this work, to be able to get feedback from peers on other ways to handle it. Meaning, like, let's say something happens in a session. And
I've got some amazing software and people working on something that I want to chat about after this. This is actually super cool.
Cool. Yeah. Because I think that is one of the ways that we can start having the conversations that we might fear having and not learn from each other. Because again, things can come up that, did I do this right? What would somebody else have done? How would you handle it? And I feel like these are vital conversations to be having.
Hard V word there. Damn. So, damn. So let's get into, shamelessly. Like, what was your first interaction with PT, like psychedelics today?
Oh, I love this. So it was, I started navigating life in a, why is my attention going in this direction? And it was your course for clinicians and therapists. And I signed up and you took my money.
Did we have Did we have a phone call to discuss it? Cool.
Yeah. We did. Well, I was like, hey, FYI, I'm neither of those things. And you're like, good, neither am I.
Right. Like, we had all these therapists and clinicians showing up like before we even started making material for clinicians and therapists specifically. But, like, should we make a monopoly on this level of material to only people with licenses? Nope. That's my answer. Oregon says no also.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of organizations that say clinicians only. I'm like, weird. Like the idea of professional licensure is only limited time old, right? Like I don't even know when the first therapist came around.
Well, what was really interesting about that course as well that I think is relevant to the entire movement up in Oregon is you could tell who was there as a clinician or a therapist in their perspective and who was there from the position of holding space, being space holders currently, and with the medicine. That's how Mark and I met, was in class together. Yeah.
That's one of my favorite parts. Like people actually meet each other and find the others.
Yeah. From the other side of the country. He was, and I remember listening to him speak in class and I was like, who is this person? Couldn't tell if he was 24 or 55. And so, and I remember in the very last class, I was like, hey, I'd love to talk further. And from there, it has spurred into changing the trajectory of both of our lives.
Totally.
Yeah.
32, by the way.
I know now.
But yeah, that conversation led to me giving away all of my things and moving from Alabama to land in Oregon and establish residency there just in time to have the opportunity to work if I would like to. And I probably will when things open up next year.
Yeah, that's the community building aspect that is so important in this work, is having community.
Right. And I think there's a lot of emphasis on the one-on-one, digging deep and looking at trauma. And that's great. It's extremely helpful. However, the other aspects are, as we mentioned earlier, y'all mentioned earlier, play and then community building. I think a lot of addiction especially comes from a lack of connection and isolation.
Mm-hmm. Community
you brought us
medicine.
Together. Look at that.
Hopefully I don't regret it.
Yeah.
I think so far it's going good.
You are in my parents' RV right now.
Thank goodness.
So there's that.
Hell yeah. And Mark, I had no idea you were that young. I don't actually even think about age too much. I'm like, wait a second. Yeah. So that's great. And I'm glad like there's a lot of collaboration and friendships developing. And it's amazing the connections I've been able to facilitate. And, I wish I could be friends with everybody like actively. There's way too many relationships now. I can't even track who's who like often, but I love it.
Yeah. I mean, you're meeting a lot of people over the course of a year, but just reflecting back on the class that Brenna and I shared, it's, Brenna and I have remained very close, but I have at least one other friend who's one of my closest friends these days that came out of that. And I know that Brenna has stayed in contact with several people from that course. And so it's been a really beautiful thing.
Love it. Brenna, can you talk at all about your engagement in Oregon, or is that private? It's okay if it is.
Yeah, I guess I'm happy to share that there are councils that are talking about how to create ethical models to move into our Western medical model in a psychedelic way. And really that's what it's going to look like, is a lot of conversations about building a living, breathing document of code of ethics to become a framework that is going to be used by the Oregon Initiative. And it's exciting and terrifying and all of the different feelings mixed together in one. And at the same time, I'm grateful that the conversations are happening and that they are pooling people from all of different walks of life that have interest in this, so that it is not just one voice that is saying this is how it is, that it's people with different lenses and different vantage points, but they all have a reason to want to be in the conversation because they feel it's such an important one to have.
Which I think lends itself to oversight and accountability, which I has been lacking in a lot of the spaces that I've worked. I mean, none of the retreat centers had anybody to turn to. And in Europe or in Holland, there's the Guild of Guides, but really they don't have any say over what anyone's doing. It's just like, here's guidelines you can follow. And I think being so secretive about this work is what's led to a lot of the issues that have come forth in different communities, the Bay Area, New York City. It's important that we bring these conversations to the forefront.
You've had situations in both cities. So like, right. Like, at a certain point, Mark, I was like, I'm so thankful. And Kyle and I agreed on this, that I'm not in San Francisco and I'm not in fucking New York.
Yeah.
Like the scenes were so toxic and aggressive that I'm like, no fucking way. But like going on what you were saying, Mark, there's this interesting idea of at what point am I comfortable giving my authority over to somebody, or does that need to come through some sort of coercion? Like who can I trust as an accountability partner as opposed to like a decentralized voice? You know what I mean? Like a decentralized community, like a regional ethics set or a regional accountability set. So making it smaller and local as opposed to, hey, we're the federal ethics authority and we're going to fuck you up. Like if you say the wrong thing or touch somebody's hand, like at what point are you willing to bow to some sort of authority?
I think it's already happening organically in some of these communities. I'm a part of a training right now, which I feel good about because it is public and nobody's hiding their names. And if I want to be an employee of this church, I have to. And so it's a choice that I get to make by receiving the perks that would come from working for this organization, as well as holding myself accountable, which I'm always down for that.
Love to hear your opinion.
Yeah, I feel like the community model and smaller communities that self-regulate, but having kind of an umbrella, like parent concept of, hey, we are wanting to support giving you all the tools that you need to build within your communities and self-regulate. I think it's also really important for the communities to be able to talk to each other because certain things arise in one area that maybe have not in another. Recently, when we were in Salt Lake City, somebody was talking about soft medicine, which I wasn't really familiar with, but it was basically facilitators making chocolates that had numerous different substances in them, but they weren't disclosing everything. So they were just offering medicine that was not fully consensual or not, the person wasn't fully aware of what it was. And
There's
I was like,
number of bad actors out there doing that.
Yeah, I've now heard it. I just hadn't seen it in the communities I was in. And the other thing is a consideration is there are predators in any industry.
Anywhere.
And if they get caught in one community, they can often travel to another without their reputation following them. And to be able to say, hey, this person caused problems where we were at. We just want you to be aware that this might be something to watch out for.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot about different communities, some rather large in this country, that offer chocolates and don't disclose what's in them. They just have certain names for certain effects. And it really makes me squirmy. I don't know why anyone would want to take away that agency and education from the individual. So like, I think it's important for them to know what they're taking so that they can make a more informed decision as they move forward.
Yeah. So, this is kind of wrapped up in the Octavio, Gerry Sandoval thing, where Gerry was actually, I had testimony from some people who used to travel around and serve medicine with Gerry Sandoval. I hate to use the medicine word, by the way, but.
What's your word?
Drugs, substance, psychedelics, compounds, whatever, I just, the M word's weird to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get over it eventually, everybody. I don't know why it's fucking trippy for me, but Gerry, allegedly, I have no evidence, but this person claimed that he would actually serve 4-ACO DMT instead of 5-MeO DMT and like have people smoke it on occasion when his alleged stashes around the country like didn't yield anything. I'm like, that's fucking crazy. Like what on earth? And like that website isn't up anymore, but I really, you can find it in the Wayback Machine. Have you ever seen that? The 5-MeO DMTmalpractice.org
no
site. We used to use it as like a pretty core part of our course. I should probably print it out and just like have it as an embedded PDF on the course. But the idea being that there was like a lot of people kind of signing similar to North Star Pledge, like, hey, there's a lot of abuses here and we've got to be mindful. And even it's so complicated. Like, what are the ethics of using some sort of electrical device, be it taser or something a lot less severe? I think it's a taser. They say, oh, it's just a little attention getting device. I'm like, fuck yourself. No, like that's so fucked up. And then like, at what point is it okay to pour water and aspirate it into somebody's lungs? I think that's never okay, but he's a medical doctor.
Right.
So he apparently doesn't believe in like lung infections from aspirated fluids. It's like, dude, it's so fucked up.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to hospitalize somebody because they wanted to do 5-MeO-DMT, like what on earth?
Yeah.
You know, but people aren't necessarily coming forward with cases of like lung infections, but we can see it in the video that people are aspirating. You can hear it.
Oh gosh.
And it's like, did we all forget about Octavio? I think so, because some other groups are getting really loud and shitty on the internet and choose their own villains. But, there's plenty of stuff just on fucking plain video.
Yeah.
I've served people up to these kind of self-appointed psychedelic police organizations, and they've done nothing. I'm like, yo, I fed you so many ethical abuses here and you did nothing. Like, what? Like, I wish I was the voice for that, but I'm not. I don't like calling people out publicly too much.
Yeah, I've had a fair amount of experience with some of the people who are quoting themselves as being watchdogs. And
dangerous word.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who's the one. Like you said, self-appointed. So that's where I feel community regulation can be a safeguard. But then again, we've seen communities that put people in positions of power because of who they were, and the crumble was really devastating. So hopefully we can learn from these situations. And I think awareness that they are happening is an important part of the learning.
Like some fundamental assumptions I find really helpful are there's always going to be a certain percentage of the population that's a sociopath. Mm-hmm. That's like a shark or a wolf, like trying to get whatever they can. And they have a very different idea of what ethics are than we do often. And, what even are ethics? But we have to assume that's happening. Like it's pretty well established how much abuse is happening in regular mental health circles, even like a normal doctor-patient relationship, psychiatrist-patient, therapist-patient. Like there's certain levels of known abuse in those lanes. And nobody's up in arms in the same way they are in psychedelics. We just don't have a clear view on the numbers yet. Like I think it's proportional. I think it's the same percentage of abuse in psychedelic spaces as elsewhere, which is sad.
Yeah.
But it's a truth we need to face.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially as things are coming online and people are highly skeptical or undereducated around these substances, I think they can lend themselves to be more judgmental. And it's not the only circumstance where we do this, but we're taking vulnerable people and making them more vulnerable.
I feel one of the things that I see as being a conversation that's not really happening through the media streams about what this is what this really entails. It's like you see somebody took the substance and the result is they have found that it mitigated depression or anxiety or whatnot. But like, really, what is the work? Like, how is that going to show up? And these conversations, I don't see in media outlets, but those are what's droving people to it. So from a facilitator standpoint, I think a huge part of it is educating people on what this really is. And that's like, I'd like to start having more honest conversations publicly, but unfortunately,
it's not pretty, it's not sexy.
No.
It's often like about as ugly as possible.
Yeah.
And, but like ugliness helps like bring out the beauty later often, right? It's kind of like a alchemical cycle.
Yeah.
So is there a story that you think would be helpful to be telling, or just like individual case studies, like sharing that with the public, like how like brutal at times it is? Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, we're such a headline society, right? We read the headline and even within it, it's sensationalized news. And that's where people are learning about this work for the most part, unless it's coming through somebody they know that's done it. And that's a small percentage of the population currently. But I was just doing an integration with somebody, and I remember during the journey, they were like, if I knew what this was, I wouldn't have fucking done this. Like, and now they said they would do it again, but not for a while because it has been beneficial. But I mean, that's the reality of when you're in it. You're like, oh, holy shit. This is because it is also the ineffable. It's kind of like what you were talking about with the language, using the word medicine. Like, there's so much language that does not translate into how to communicate the ineffable energy behind this.
The idea that, like, can we actually have real psychedelic informed consent is a really interesting idea to me.
Mm-hmm.
I have my doubts, and is that insurmountable, or do we just need to like figure out like at least our community's consensus around what is acceptable and what isn't?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Your thoughts, sorry.
Yeah, I really like that idea because it's true. We as a culture, we severely lack education around these things, as we've been talking about. And coming from Alabama, it's like really limited there. And also, I wanted to touch upon your sharing about your feelings towards the words medicine. I think that's great because this is a way and a problem in the community, in the psychedelic community, where we're sensationalizing these substances over other substances rather than keeping it an even playing field.
Or them being the medicine themselves.
That's, 100%.
There's a lot of like shame and baggage when we talk about how awesome psychedelics are and how bad other drugs are, right? I know people who are absolutely crippled with certain diseases and they use certain drugs that people in the psychedelic scene want to shame the shit out of just to get through their day. And like the attitudes are so gross sometimes, like kills me. And the term medicine can be almost weaponized too. Like, it's medicine, so it's okay if I grope you during your session or have sex with you during your session. Like, it's a way to manipulate as well, and like recontextualize so you have power and they don't. And there's one person that's still out there and they regularly have sex in session with their clients, and a number of the clients are okay with it. Like, I've heard plenty of reports about it being problematic for some people, but other people are like, no, that was exactly what I needed. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, this is so gnarly to me. And like, I could find out the person's name, but I like have tried my best to not.
Yeah.
In case I get raged out and want to do something.
Right.
Make it, put a couple barriers in place before I actually like can rage out and make an impulsive decision that I might regret.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, their past clients are the ones that have the most power to come forward with a story, not a third party like me.
Right.
It's like all this hearsay that's like not even written down or signed off on. It's like, it's worth nothing in court. In fact, I could get sued for defamation, libel, and shit like that if I don't, trauma abuse survivors. There's a lot of baggage around like what happens if you report. Are the police just going to throw it out because there were drugs in the mix? Like, there's a book I read. I had a few people tell me I shouldn't cite the book anymore, but the book had a lot of, so I won't name it, but there's a ton of case studies. It's like the number one kind of like the rape capital of America, unfortunately. And like the police barely take anything seriously. They barely put any money into DNA testing of the kits and like all this stuff. And like just the idea of how many untested rape kits are out there in police departments is like, what are these policemen doing?
Yeah.
What is law enforcement actually doing? I've got some dark comments I share, but it's like, how do we even grapple with this?
Yeah. I mean, as a woman who has been on a journey with someone else who was sexually assaulted through the process of reporting sexual assault, I can tell you it's not made to be easy to navigate. So I think that's one conversation that's really important, is if somebody's coming forward and they feel safe enough to share. I think statistically it's like less than 5% of anyone coming forward has ever been doing so out of untruth. So just the fact that people are...
Broadly or just psychedelics?
I think it's across the board.
Okay.
So I don't know the
That
statistics.
number seems reasonable.
Yeah. I don't know the statistics as far as in the psychedelic space. I don't know that anyone
There's not
could.
enough like data collection happening for us to understand that
Yeah.
yet.
But what's coming up for me when I hear you talk about this is just the simple fact that like someone's willing to share with you what's happened. I agree. It's their story to share. But at the same time, how do you liberate them to share it if they feel like they need to? What are the outlets for them to go to?
What are some safeguards people can put in place? You know, when I was running these sessions in Jamaica, I got consent and told everybody, hey, we're videotaping it until we like consent that we're all good, like on the other side. And that was my method.
Yeah.
You know, even with 2 people in the room, you know, we've seen failures there too.
Yeah.
So like even 2 people isn't good enough. So for perfect protection, you know,
Right.
I think one person, if you have the right person, all good all day long. But it's not a guarantee. So maybe the individual should have their own, like, you know, $40 kind of GoPro knockoff that they have in the corner that's theirs. They get to take at the end. And, you know, I don't know the answer, but, you know, there are tools and technologies we can look at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have an answer either. And I've curiously explored the idea of videotaping sessions, and I do audio recordings, and even for some people, they don't like having technology in the room. So like, what do you do when that's their personal preference for their journey? So
as facilitators, you have to be responsible for your own safety as well.
Oh, totally.
Right?
And that's a big conversation to be having as well, because I know like it's rare, but there have been times where I have felt unsafe, and like you're in an isolated
I had one client
situation.
go, are we having sex now? I'm like, what the, like, what do I do here? Like, the answer is you say no. No, we're just doing a session.
Right.
And thankfully I had video cameras running. So I'm like, okay, I feel actually pretty safe right now. I'm not as weirded out as I could be if I was just alone in the room with this person. But this kind of stuff comes up with sexual trauma histories, and like, you know, like erogenous things do come up for people, and people can get really horny in session. So it's like, how do you navigate that? You try to mitigate it and, like, you know, let them explore it. You don't you back off.
Right.
Like,
well, that's one of my, my container boundaries to begin with. So like, it's already brought up prior to going into it. And oftentimes people will say, that happens. It's like, for some people, yeah, it's possible.
Like,
and there's no shame around it. Yeah.
Anything you can imagine can happen. And like, that's hard for people to handle. Like this idea that anything can happen. It's a lot.
It's humbling.
Totally. Like, again, the infinity.
Yeah.
It's there. And it's, you know, sometimes things happen that you couldn't even possibly imagine. So, you know, just anything is possible in these sessions, and really weird and strange things do happen. And is it the facilitator or is it you? Like, I like to think about empowering the individual.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest things is to give people power within their journey to know that everything that's unfolding is within them.
Yeah.
But again, I don't claim to have the answers, but I want to be in the conversations that are going to at least support the intentions of what I believe that this work is about.
Yeah. And the infinite conflict between like regulation and the mystical. Yeah, we better regulate that mysticism quick.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's wrap. We're at an hour 8.
Ooh.
108.
Wow.
So any closing thoughts, Brenna, or links or anything?
Yeah. Closing thoughts is just one of gratitude. Like, even with all of the things that we've brought up today that seem like we don't have the answers and are challenging, I still deeply believe in this work. And I'm grateful not just for being in conversations like this, but for anybody that's willing to come forward and do it. So yeah, just gratitude.
Yeah, I'd like to second that. I'm just honored to be here having these conversations and getting the information out there. I think this is how we begin the education process, which is so important in this country.
Thank you both, Mark, Brenna. Extraordinary. We'll hopefully get some links from you all and share that in the podcast notes. And please do stay involved. You two are much needed and wanted in the space. So thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe.
And there you have it. Brenna Gebauer and Mark Haberstroh. Mark, Brenna, thank you so much for joining us. Really loved it. And I'm excited for what comes next. And, Brenna down in San Diego, Mark's, I think in Oregon. There's so much cool stuff happening here in this space, and exciting, terrifying, optimistic. There's so much happening and just fascinating stuff too. So, these are people with their feet on the ground doing really interesting work. So check them out. And I'm just, grateful, humbled that we were able to pull it off, especially at Lightning in a Bottle. So yeah, Brenna, Mark, thank you again. Thank you all for tuning in. We couldn't do it without you. And please share with a friend if you found this one interesting. I'm sure learn at least a couple things about what's going on in the psychedelic space. So, all right. I think that's it for now. Thank you all. And we'll see you on the next episode. This is Joe Moore signing off for Psychedelics Today. Bye-bye.